like to invite us into a spirit of meditation, of contemplation. I am holding close in my heart, as I know many of you are, the devastation that happened in Sri Lanka this morning. Hundreds of people killed as they were simply coming to church as you are doing this morning. It makes me aware of what a privilege it is that we do together. And so we hold those who are grieving in our hearts as we go into a sense of prayer. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last. Over the snows, over the centuries, over the seemingly barren times, over the heavy feet of cattle and of soldiers, treading down the fragile places of the earth. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over the tangled branches, over the withered stem, over the seemingly meaningless pain, over the tearing thorns of roses and barbed wire. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over the closed rooms that are not its home, over efforts to domesticate its wild truth, over the vain words of priests and poets. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last, bringing the breath of wind and the ancient cries that precede language. Defy words, bringing in its frail truth, humbly, prophetically, unconscious of self. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over us, over pasts and futures, over words and silences, over deaths and lives, placing them all in their proper place, restoring to all things their joyful smallness. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last. Amen. So there they were, a ragtag group of people who had never been singled out before in their lives. A fisherman, a woman who was thought to be a prostitute, people who were hardly ever considered special. Suddenly they were a part of something more incredible than they could imagine. This extraordinary man had come into their lives, and they followed him, sometimes not even really knowing why. Their lives now felt important. They understood things that they had never really known before. It was like a gray cloth had been pulled aside, and behind it was this brand new, sparkling world of adventure. And the adventure kept growing. The group of followers got larger and larger, and they began to be known wherever they went. Sometimes huge crowds would gather just to see him, and followers even would be touched by the people who wanted to just touch something close to him. He did something to people, not through a magical power from afar off, but by showing them they had the magic within themselves, that they carried the key if they would just use it. But then it started to get too big. The crowds grew larger and more rowdy. The man was more and more outspoken in his criticism of the powers that be. And that wasn't such a problem before, but now that they were so well known, everyone was paying attention. And the crowds kept getting bigger and bigger. And one of the followers wanted the man to use his influence politically, but he said no. He was after something deeper, something more meaningful, something that would change people's inner lives as well as outward circumstances. And then the worst thing happened. The political one betrayed him. He turned him into the authorities. He told stories about him. They couldn't imagine it, one of them who had traveled so far with them turning on him now. But the man seemed to expect it. And then things really got ugly. All of the followers were going to be arrested, and so they felt like they had to do it. They felt that they had to pretend that they didn't know him, or else they would go down with him. They felt terrible, confused, guilty, afraid, sad, and angry with him. Things go this far. And then he was gone, killed in the most humiliating way possible, cruelly executed with the common criminals, and then his tortured body was thrown into a mass grave. One of his rich followers bribed the government to at least get his body back and put it into a tomb and rolled a heavy stone across it to at least keep his body safe. The followers were stunned. They didn't know what to do, where to go, who to see. They stayed hidden away in case they were still at risk. And they could hardly look at each other for their shame and their grief. And finally, two of them, his mother and his lover, thought that at least they would go and properly prepare his body for burial. And as they walked there, they realized they wouldn't be able to move that big stone by themselves, and thought, what are we going to do? And when they arrived, the stone had already been moved. Someone else had rolled it away. Where could it be? Even more, where was the body of their beloved son, lover? The body was gone. Did grave robbers take it? Did some malicious enemy take this opportunity for revenge? Or was it possible something far more mysterious happened? Whatever this story may mean to you theologically, you have to admit it's a great story. And biblical scholars tend to agree that this is truly the end, the original end to the story. This is where the oldest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, ends. The parts about the resurrection and Jesus appearing to the apostles came much later, when the other gospels began to be written down and repeated. And it's at this point that I prefer to let the story end, facing the empty tomb, not knowing whether emptiness brings hopelessness or new life. This is the story that I think at some level we can all identify with. Haven't most of us at some point in our lives encountered something wonderfully exciting, something so deep and real we think it will change our lives forever, and then inevitably something about the experience disappoints us. We find out it isn't the cure-all for all things that ail us. We discover that perfection does not exist in the world, and we find ourselves responding in selfish or self-protective or fearful ways, and we're left with all of that emptiness. Perhaps it's my own wishful thinking, but I believe that what Jesus, the human being, intended was not that people would create stories about his bodily resurrection, but that they would finally listen to what he had been trying to tell them all along, that the magic was in themselves. That the kingdom was not something off in another world and in another age, but something here among us now, between us now. That emptiness is not necessarily a disappointment, but the embodiment of hope. What happens when we face that empty tomb is up to us. We can turn away in hopelessness, discouraged that someone or something has disappointed us yet again, or we can choose to dig deeper within ourselves, to bring it alive within us. We can choose to have faith in the renewal that comes, knowing that often it comes simply because we have faith that it will. This is a message echoed in the natural world around us. In the winter, it feels like the spring will never come. The warmth and the green will never bloom. But deep inside ourselves, we know eventually it will. We know because we have seen it before. We trust in the cycles of life. And the same is true of us spiritually. Our souls cycle through periods of great excitement and enlightenment, and then suddenly things seem to go underground, making it hard and cold and dry inside. But if we choose to see that empty time as an opportunity for rebuilding, for new life to come in, then miraculously, it does. The poet Karen Boy put it this way: "It hurts when buds burst. There is pain when something grows and when something must close. Then, when it is worst and nothing helps, they burst as if in ecstasy, the first buds of the tree, when fear itself is compelled to let go. They fall in a glistening veil, all the drops from the twigs blinking away their fears of the new, shutting out their doubts about the journey, feeling for an instant how this is their greatest safety, to trust in the daring that shapes the world. To trust in the daring that shapes the world. That is what Easter calls us to do. To trust not only in something new coming from outside, but in our own abilities to bring about our own renewal. It is only in emptiness that new life can take root. Renewal will come. It will come. It just lies inside the empty tomb.